President Donald Trump is laying out the path for the U.S. and Israel's war on Iran, saying the goals are to destroy Iran's missiles, the Navy, nuclear capabilities, and its ability to sponsor terror. And the timeline is as long as it takes.
Right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it. Whatever somebody said today, they said, oh, well, the president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored. There's nothing boring about this.
This weekend, Prime Minister Mark Carney said Canada supports U.S. action to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But earlier today, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand said this isn't how Canada wants to get there.
We prefer a diplomatic solution. This is why I have spent the last 2 days speaking with my counterparts across the Middle East and in the Gulf states, and all of my G7 counterparts, stressing that Canada believes in a diplomatic and peaceful solution, and as soon as possible, we would like parties to get to the table.
So is there still an option to even get to the table? Joining me now is Dennis Horak. He was the last Canadian head of mission in Iran. Kaveh Shahruz is a lawyer and human rights activist and a former senior policy advisor for Global Affairs Canada. And Thomas Junot is a professor of public and international affairs at the University of Ottawa. Dennis, I'm going to start with you. I want to sort of start on the timing of this. Do we have a better sense at this point in time of why the U.S. and Israel decided to do this now? What was it about now?
There's been various reports floating around. One was that the last round of negotiations and the Iranians were playing negotiation games and that there was no movement towards bridging the gap on enrichment. Other reports I've seen were that the U.S. saw that Khamenei and the leadership had come above ground and were all in one spot, and then it was a target of opportunity. I think it's really hard to say. I think at a certain point, the U.S. had assets in there for a while, and they had moved the other asset into the Mediterranean. I think they just said, okay, we might as well do it now. It's hard to sometimes pinpoint down the American administration on details like that, I think.
Kaveh, do you have any sense of why, Israel and the U.S. decided to go now?
Good to be with you. I want to echo what the ambassador said. It's often very difficult to know why Donald Trump does anything when he chooses to do it. I've seen the same news reports indicating that the Supreme Leader and his defense team were gathering at their bunker, and that seemed to provide an opportunity for them to act. The buildup had been going on for a long time. My sense is that the feeling was that there was never going to be really a nuclear deal to arrive at, and so this seemed like the opportune time to take action.
And Thomas, I saw you nodding along there when Kaveh said, you can't really necessarily predict what Donald Trump is going to do. Are we sort of in one of those moments again?
We are in terms of trying to understand what exactly triggered the precise moment. I would agree with what my two colleagues just said. And I think the same goes for the next steps. What exactly is the objective for President Trump? If you collate a list of what he has said in the past 72 hours or so, he has talked about regime change. He has talked about diminishing and eliminating, Iran's nuclear program, its missile capability, its ability to support terrorist groups in the region. But he has also openly talked about reaching out or being reached out to by Iran's new leadership and to start working again on a deal. So there is a lot of confusion now in terms of how long will this go and what is the end game. And there's a bit of a tendency sometimes to dismiss that debate as being academic or theoretical, but it's not, because what the objective is for the U.S. matters not only in terms of what is going on now, but more importantly, what happens once that objective is reached or not reached, which is when there needs to be a plan. There needs to be a plan in terms of a next government for Iran if we go all the way to regime collapse. If we don't go all the way to regime collapse and there's a deal or something that means that the regime survives, well, then how are we going to deal with what is going to be a weaker but probably even more dangerous reconfigured regime after that? So these are really important debates to which we have really no answer at all.
Dennis, something that Thomas sort of pointed out there, the confusion around what the U.S. end goal is at this point, is that something that actually helps President Donald Trump? Because if you name all different kinds of goals for the outcome or the end game of this military operation, you can sort of shift the goalpost to whatever sort of suits you to get to where you need to be to call something a win.
I think that's absolutely right. He's retained some flexibility. Whether there is a grand plan, whether there is a grand list of objectives that they haven't shared with us, don't know. As you said, they've sort of put out a whole laundry list. So it does provide some flexibility. I think we also have to consider here, what are the Israeli objectives? What is the criteria for success for them and the declaration of victory? Obviously, the U.S. will have the upper hand in that, but I think they will be working with the Israelis as well. And so, again, we don't know what the criteria of victory are. They could just pull one out of the hat and say, "I'm done with it." We just don't know.
Kaveh, what do you make of the lack sort of clarity about what the long-term objective here is, and as well as the long-term timeline?
Well, I think the cynical take is that Donald Trump himself doesn't really know what his objectives are. He's kind of uh, playing it by ear. He's testing out kind of how this war will pull, what its effect is going to be on the markets. Already, we're seeing oil prices go up. 6 U.S. servicemen seem to have been killed so far. That's obviously going to, impose a cost on Donald Trump politically. So by listing all these different possible objectives, if the war proves popular, he can keep going. If it proves unpopular, he can pull back, saying, we've achieved our limited objectives. So he seems to be playing a game. But I do think, though, that a lot of these things are interconnected. Achieving an end to Iran's nuclear program and achieving an end to its ballistic missile program and a change in regime. I think it's really important to think of these things as being interlinked. I don't think there is any part of this regime that is going to simply, get along with the West. It's not going to become pro-Western, pro-Israeli. So I think any segment of this regime is going to continue to pose a threat to the West. And ultimately, I think to achieve those objectives, regime change really has to be on the table.
Tomas, in the response that we've seen from what's left of the Iranian regime is some airstrikes targeting that have hit and struck some of the Gulf nations. Why, or how successful could it be to sort of pressure those Gulf states if they get dragged into this conflict? What can that do to build pressure on the U.S. and Israel to perhaps change course?
Well, the strategy, the intent on the Iranian side was transparent here. The threat was if the U.S. is actively pursuing regime change and the threat is existential for the Islamic Republic, which it is absolutely now, Iran will unleash most of what it has all over the place. So it has targeted, obviously, Israel. It has targeted U.S. military assets in the region, but it has also hit very hard the 6 Arab states of the Persian Gulf. So the pro-American, oil-rich Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, and Kuwait. The strategy on the Iranian side is to hurt them. So the vast majority of the several hundred missiles and drones that Iran has sent on them hit residential areas, urban areas. It has and not American military assets. That's only been a small minority of the strikes. And the point is to hurt them, bleed them, so that they go to the U.S., their friend, and pressure the U.S. to stop. The problem, that was the strategy. The problem is that it is exactly the opposite that is going on right now. Arab states of the Gulf are absolutely enraged right now at being targeted so hard by Iran. And I've been, texting with a lot of my friends and colleagues in the Gulf today and yesterday, and that is the reaction. And the issue here is that they have responded not by pressuring the U.S. to stop, but by aligning themselves even more closely with the U.S. So for Iran, it has basically, and not for the first time, but shot itself in the foot by hurting regimes that initially were somewhat reluctant to support the U.S.
Dennis, is that your assessment as well?
I think that's right. The idea is to raise the costs, and it has backfired for the moment. If the costs in fact do go up, if oil facilities in Saudi Arabia are hit, and if the Straits of Hormuz remain closed for a substantial amount of time, I'm doubtful of that, but just say it does, then the cost, and you could see the Gulf states start to say to the U.S., let's find an off ramp here. But for the moment, and Iran really had this was in their playbook all along. when backed into a corner, when really facing the existential crisis they're facing now, the idea was to lash out, was to cause as much damage to the neighboring states, to stability in the region, to the international oil markets. They're doing the best at making that happen.
Kaveh, we've seen some, scenes playing out all over the world. Iranians that are living in different places, in many cases, have fled, celebrating the death of the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, rooting for regime change, but also mixed with this undercurrent of fear and concern around the uncertainty of this moment, especially in light of what happened in January. What has happened time and time again with the regime cracking down on protesters in the streets and murdering people in the streets. In this moment, is there sort of a spark of momentum that perhaps this could be the start of what could end up being a very long process toward regime change?
I think certainly there's a spark. Certainly, I think part of the reason why so many are celebrating, and I don't think it's just outside the country. I think inside the country, some of the videos that are coming out show people celebrating when bombs hit. The reason they're happy is that for the first time, despite the potential for civilian casualties, despite the destruction, for the first time they're sensing hope that there is a possibility that this regime might fall. This is something that Iranians have wanted for a very long time, and they've been increasingly vocal about it over the years. And the international community, by and large, has abandoned them. It's made deals with the Iranian regime. Donald Trump, for all his faults, has finally come through and done something that offers a glimmer of hope. So I think that spark is going to keep them motivated and keep them pushing for regime change.
Thomas, can that happen if the United States doesn't get involved on the ground?
I hope, but I fear that it won't. I think the hope is real, and I think, as Kaveh just said, there is a window of opportunity now, unlike in the past, for the regime to actually fall. But that raises several questions, and these are not mutually exclusive views or dynamics. One of them is the severe possibility, I think, that Donald Trump would throw Iranians under the bus. I can see a scenario where Trump ends up basically declaring victory, as we said a few minutes ago, and saying, you know what, this war is too complicated. Oil prices are going up. It's going to cost me at the midterms. And he basically stops and declares victory and says, we've achieved our objectives, in which case the Islamic Republic survives and the Iranians in the country, but also in the diaspora, are basically thrown under the bus. The other scenario, which I also fear, is if Donald Trump goes all the way, the regime falls. And then what happens next? The ideal scenario is a new system takes over, ideally a democratic one. But the alternative is either a reconfiguration of the regime, maybe centered around the Revolutionary Guard, which might be even worse than what we have now, or chaos. And I want to be careful here to say that this is not viewed as a threat or as an argument in favor of not doing anything. This is an argument in favor of being very cautious about what comes next, mindful of the risks, and calling for preparation for the post-Islamic Republic context, which I do not see the current Trump administration doing in any serious way.
Dennis, we have about a minute and a half left here. I want to put that same question to you about regime change. Is it possible without American support on the ground or in the long run to sort of make this happen?
Even with American support, unless it was massive, as we saw in Iraq, I don't see how it happens. It's hard to see the path from, okay, we've eliminated the leadership. Iranians walk in and take over your government, as the president said. I don't see what that path is from A to B. I'm not sure the Americans do either. I'm not sure, and as Thomas said, I'm not sure that that's going to be a driving force for them in any case. I think there was a lot of hope in the Americans' comments. I don't know that the opposition, I don't think is as united as it sometimes is portrayed on the streets of Toronto and other places. They're fractious. They've tried to coalesce in the past, not overly successfully. So I'm not really sure how we get from A to B. I also worry a little bit that if there is a sort of a Venezuela kind of situation where they clear out the people at the top, they get a much more pliant government that comes in somehow, and then the U.S. starts pressuring them for oil deals and things like that. That also overly complicates things. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I'm going to have to jump in because we have run out of time, but there's plenty more to talk about. I suspect I will talk with all three of you again later this week. Thank you so much for your time, Dennis Horak, Tom Juneau, and Kaveh Shahrouz. Thank you so much.